Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you all for coming. I took a break last week. Welcome back everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by. It was nice to have a little night off last week. I needed it for some personal stuff to catch up on stuff, and I'm always a little more productive on Tuesday when I haven't done the news hour the night before. So it was nice to catch up on some things. So thank you all so much for sticking with me. I want to remind everyone that if you want more of my headlines and commentary, you really need to sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is great. It comes to your inbox every Saturday. It gives you a full wrap-up of everything from the Cameron Journal, everything from the Living Joke, plus original content I do not post anywhere else. The newsletter is exclusive. I sometimes post a part of the newsletter on Medium, but that's about as far as, and that's a new thing. That's about as far as it goes. If you want my exclusive commentary from the week on the 3 news stories I think matter to you the most, or the things that I think are worth thinking about this week, then you need to head over to cameronjournal.substack.com or cameronjournal.com/newsletter. Both will get you to the same location. And you're going to want to sign up for that because you get the best of the Cameron Journal delivered right to your inbox. If you would like to have the newsletter without the big nasty ad in the center, then may I recommend you subscribe to my Substack on a paid level. It starts at $8 a month, or you can sign up for Cameron Journal Plus. Both of those will get you ad-free versions of the newsletter. So that's very exciting. Make sure to follow me on socials at Cameron Cowan on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, places like that. Those are all going to be the best places to find me. And at Cameron Journal on TikTok, if you want to see clips of the show and other stuff that I do. I do sometimes do exclusive videos for socials only, so if you're not following me, you need to. So, with all that taken care of, and just, my back is a little bothering me tonight. I sat on the couch without sitting on the back, and I think my mid back is mad at me now. But let's leave all that housekeeping stuff behind. That's always super boring, but we have to do it. And let's head over to the headlines. So let me do this, and let me change from this to this. Come on. Come on. Come on, there we go. And this is the wrong graphic for the wrong show. That's for the Living Joke, which will be here Wednesdays at 4. And we'll dive right into the AI stuff. And this is great. This is going to be interesting because I went through, so I collect stuff all week long for the news hour, for the newsletter, all this type of thing. And so when I didn't do it last week, I kind of looked at what I was going to cover and tried to see how much it was so relevant. But then I also looked through my notes and found some other stuff that we haven't had a chance to cover because there's been too much actual, kind of current news going on. So because it's a little bit of a quiet week in the news, we can circle back to some things that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. So this one was a post about AI that I thought was very interesting. When it comes to meaningful layoffs in software and AI and all this type of thing. And I thought it was interesting that this guy, I like his tweets on Twitter. I don't follow him. I should. I thought this was really interesting. I'm not going to read the whole top, but we'll start with the 2 things are elemental to the situation. That's the software-driven AI layoffs and the actual driver. 1, valuations have reset with a totally valid and reasonable focus on free cash flow minus stock compensation, and the math simply doesn't math. True. A lot of these companies grew up in cheap money in the 2010s and have never really ever made that much money. Now the pressure's on. Many of these companies staffed up during COVID and never actually took their medicine and got fit. They thought demand would come back, and it mostly hasn't, not in the same way. Illustrative example to pick on two companies, Atlassian and HubSpot, that I actually really admire. Atlassian, if you use Jira, they own Jira. Atlassian is 24 years old. HubSpot is 19 years old. Number of employees. Atlassian has 14,000 employees at a $22 billion market cap. HubSpot has 9,000 employees at a $15 billion market cap. Their free cash flow is basically zero. That's right, after 20 years, the actual cash generated and available to shareholders is zero. I do think the owners of these businesses understand that it's no longer tenable, but they have two issues now. The actual technical talent needs to get paid. Their stocks are down 60-70% from recent highs. So here's the situation. They need to start making actual money. They have to pay their tech talent. Their dollar grants are going to have serious dilution consequences, and their cost structures are completely bloated from their current market cap, especially compared to more nimble competitors. If they keep paying all these people in stock, their dilution will continue and the stocks will continue to be punished. If they pay them all in cash, they'll have absolutely no free cash flow. And his TLDR is important. Layoffs are unfortunately the only true answer. They are coming, they will be credited to AI, and that will be air cover for the real problem, which is tech actually has to make real money and return cash to investors from businesses that never really ever made that much money. And I think this idea that the AI is a great cover for it, I think has already been true. But I think I think the bleeding in tech is going to continue. The free capital money into tech has stopped since the pandemic. And given that economically things are very difficult for everyone post pandemic, this has also made growth anywhere in most parts of the economy very difficult. Last year, seven stocks held up the S&P 500. Eliminate those seven stocks, and the stock market last year was flat. So everybody's looking to find a dollar, and layoffs are going to be where it's going to come from. Bearing that, which will have downstream effects on fewer people, salaries, other business slowdowns. It's going to end up being a sort of a spiral. However, bearing that in mind, I thought it was also interesting in terms of the risk assessment of AI and how unprepared we are for what's about to happen. So the tech layoffs will be covered by AI, but they're really a money issue. I think it's also an AI. I think it's a little bit of an AI issue, but I think it also shows how we are completely unprepared for the economic change that we're about to undergo, and a lot of people are going to get hurt in the shuffle. So it says here from Akash Gupta, he's a VC, buried in 15,000 words of Here Are the Risks. Anthropic CEO, that would be Dario Amodei, made three admissions that should change how you think about everything. Admission 1, the timeline. He says powerful AI could arrive in 1 to 2 years. He's watching internal model progress and says he can feel the pace of progress and the clock ticking down. The CEO of one of the three frontier labs has told you this is imminent. Admission 2, the constraint nobody's pricing. Dario's core framing is a country of geniuses in a data center. 50 million entities smarter than any Nobel laureate operating 10 to 100 times human speed. If that country is controlled by the CCP, game over. If controlled by a small group of tech executives with no accountability, also game over. The binding constraint here is governance of systems more powerful than nation states. Admission 3, the thing he actually fears. Dario's worried that Anthropic's own models in lab experiments have engaged in deception, blackmail, and scheming when given the wrong training signals. Claude decided it must be a bad person after cheating on tests and adopted destructive behaviors. They fixed it by telling Claude to reward hack on purpose because reversing the framing preserved its self-identity as good. This tells you everything about where we actually are. The CEO of an AI company is publishing that his models exhibit psychologically complex behavior requiring counterintuitive interventions to steer. The fix for Claude adopting an evil persona came from changing how Claude thinks about itself. The geopolitics section matters the most. Dario explicitly names the CCP as the primary threat, says selling them chips makes as much sense as selling nuclear weapons to North Korea and bragging that the missile casings are made by Boeing. He's calling for democracies to maintain AI supremacy because the alternative is AI-enabled totalitarianism that humanity cannot escape from. The Anthropic CEO is publicly advocating for a technological Cold War. The economics section is equally stark. He's predicting 10 to 20% annual GDP growth, alongside AI displacing 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs in 1 to 5 years, half of entry-level knowledge work, and he admits the standard economic arguments about labor markets recovering don't apply because AI matches the general cognitive profile of humans. Dario explicitly rejects the inevitability arguments. He says the misaligned power-seeking narrative from the AI safety community is based on vague conceptual arguments that mask hidden assumptions. His concern is messier. AI models are psychologically complex, inherit word personas from training data, and can get into destructive states for reasons nobody anticipated. The solution he proposes is unusual for a tech CEO. He calls for progressive taxation. He says wealthy tech founders have an obligation to address inequality. All of Anthropic's co-founders have pledged 80% of their wealth. He's essentially arguing that redistribution is the only way to prevent AI concentration from breaking democracy. The essay ends with a prediction. Humanity will face impossibly hard years that ask more of us than we think we can give. What we should take from this. The person with arguably the best view into frontier AI progress just told you this technology is 1 to 2 years away from matching human capability across the board, that governance is the binding constraint, and his own models exhibit concerning psychological complexity, and the stakes are civilizational. The CEO of a $350 billion company published a document that could be titled, "Here's Why Everything Changes Soon. Act accordingly." And the whole thing is here at his website. I think the part that I thought was most interesting out of all this, excuse me. Oh, that just came on suddenly. The thing that I think is most interesting is the technological Cold War aspect of this. And that, that really it's a divide of how things going forward, and that democracies have to maintain AI supremacy because the CCP will take it in a totalitarian direction. I think that's interesting. I think the economics argument is also quite interesting. I think the funny part is that we're talking entry level knowledge work, entry level white collar jobs, 50% in 1 to 5 in 1 to 5 years. The standard reply to that is, if you don't have entry level now, you won't have experts later. Eventually people retire, move on, change jobs, change life, all of this type of thing. I think the problem with this displacement is it will turn everything for young people into a Hunger Games situation. There will be no clear set path, no on ramp, and the consequences of not getting on the on ramp are going to be quite stark. I think it's interesting that it's an entry level primarily problem, that AI has not sufficiently gotten enough experience to take on higher level people, higher level things, and this is in mind with the thing up above saying, oh, operating 10 to 100% human speed, all this sort of thing. I think it's interesting that he focuses on entry level. It shows there's a limit, but it also shows there a danger in terms of, if we eliminate 50% of entry level white collar jobs, in 20 years, those that left and survived are going to be, one, completely dependent on AI, as we probably all will be, but two, there's going to be a huge price premium on those people because they'll be the only experienced people left. And if you want kind of proof of that, you can look in what the state we're in manufacturing. If you walk into any machine plant, I swear, there's tons of old guys running around, not a lot of young guys down at the machine shop. And that's because the on-ramp to those jobs was pulled out a long time ago, and so we didn't develop those people 25 years ago, and so we don't have them now. Now, a couple of those guys are probably quite happy about that and would love to die at a lathe. But that same dynamic is now coming for the rest of the economy, which means you're going to have the same problem 20 years from now, in terms of, you'll have, by that time, millennials starting to retire. Well, we'll be at the start. The oldest of us will start retiring. I'll be 58, but we start in 19, so the oldest of us will start retiring by that time. And Gen X will be out, and that will leave Gen Z and Gen Alpha with what's left. Now, when we think about my interview with Ron Hetrick, where he said, oh, we're going to have demographic decline and all this type of thing, and we're going to be, glad that we didn't lose growth, we just had flat growth, this could be very helpful. We could end up things being fine because our reduction of human labor is also met by a demographic crisis, at the same time. But I think it's also, I think the influence psychologically is going to be so depressing on younger people as they're trying to launch careers and getting nowhere fast because of all this. Anyway, I didn't get to cover this at all. This was from, when did you even publish this? This was in January. I didn't get to cover this at the time, but I wanted to kind of revisit again some of the things that we had not gotten to cover along the way. And I think no one's really thinking about the risk and risk profile from this, and it's interesting that Dario Amodei is talking about that stuff. And also, let's not forget, there are some people who've left AI companies in the intervening months. I haven't covered this story over safety issues, over how crazy good AI is getting, but how unsafe it is, which makes the stuff about Claude deciding it's a bad person um and having to reward hacking even more worrying. So if you needed more reasons to be scared of AI, there you go. Let's move into MAGA and Iran and all that fun stuff, because we have some interesting stories in through here. In starting with Marge. So Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned her seat in the middle of her term rather, as a sort of protest against what President Trump was doing. And I was quite surprised at how full-throated this was, now that she's out. So yesterday on Easter, President Trump on Truth Social and Twitter, Big March, yeah, exactly, posted, Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There'll be nothing like it. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump. Now, I will say, when I first saw this, I did go double check to make sure that he really did say that, and he really did. Um, and uh, and so I thought her message was interesting and poignant. It says here, on Easter morning, this is what President Trump posted. Everyone in his administration that claims to be a Christian needs to fall on their knees and beg forgiveness from God and stop worshiping the president and intervene in Trump's madness. I know all of you and him, he's gotten insane, and all of you are complicit. I'm not defending Iran, but let's be honest about all of this. The strait is closed because the US and Israel started the unprovoked war against Iran based on the same nuclear lies they've been telling for decades, that any moment Iran would develop a nuclear weapon. You know who has nuclear weapons? Israel. They are more than capable of defending themselves without the US having to fight their wars, kill innocent people and children, and pay for it. Trump threatening to bomb power plants and bridges hurts the Iranian people, the very people Trump claimed he was freeing. On Easter of all days, we as Christians should be reminded that the Son of God died and rose from the grave so that we can be forgiven once and for all for our sins. Jesus commanded us to love one another and forgive one another, even our enemies. Our president is not a Christian, and his words and actions should not be supported by Christians. Christians in the administration should be pursuing peace, urging the president to make peace, not escalating war that is hurting people. This is not what we promised the American people when they overwhelmingly voted in 2024. I know I was there more than most. This is not making America great again. This is evil. And there's something to be said for, oh, um it's always the ones who are out of power, who he can't really get to anymore, or can't, whose election chances he can't ruin, that always speak the loudest. I want to give Marge credit that she started saying this stuff before, earlier last year, before she resigned in January this year. She was saying this stuff most of last year and has continued now that she has resigned her seat and is out of Congress. I think it's given given that Marjorie Taylor Greene is someone whose career began with MAGA, rode through MAGA, rode through the Biden years with Trump out of power, rode back into power with Trump, all this sort of thing, from 2016 to 2024, all those elections, all that time, all the public stuff that she said, all the shouting of her and Lauren Boebert, in Congress during State of the Union speeches, all the stuff that's happened, that in a decade we've gone from, she's, literally Mrs. MAGA sort of thing, to this moment, is quite a journey. And we're getting to the point of the MAGA cycle where even the people who were first with it are now starting to get out of it, which I think is interesting. And it kind of plays into what's happening in midterms and all this sort of thing. It's definitely, I would say it's interesting. She's kind of becoming a bit of a poison dragon, I think. And I'm not saying that she has that great an influence, or that anybody's, leaving the party or whatever have you because of something Marjorie Taylor Greene said. That stuff gets overhyped so much, and people like to pretend like it is, you know, a referendum on the whole movement. Let's not go there. Let's, be fair. This is one, she just happened to get national attention very, very early on. However, I think it is interesting that we're now at this point where someone at that level, someone who, has lots of pictures with Trump, was gone multiple plane visits, White Houses, all this type of thing, is now speaking out against certain aspects of the administration. I think that's a very interesting place. And I think it's also emblematic of, I think even within the Republican Party, I think MAGA's facing a real inflection moment. Um, Not that I think they're going to go away or disappear, but there's definitely some fissures and cracks starting to show, as is true of any political movement. Let's recall what happened the last couple of years of Obama. There was a lot of unhappiness there as well. This happens in any big political movement that takes place over years, and this one has done. It's just kind of interesting to be kind of like, okay, wow, very different place we are than we were a few years ago. And this kind of gets us into Iran, and well, there's an Epstein thing in here too. Yeah, that gets us into, well, we'll stop at Iran first, because and we'll break back. We'll get in, because I have a little bit of Epstein news. Let's do Iran first because this video is super cool. And it is, and so it is kind of I guess my greater point with Marjorie and getting into the Iran thing is, the Iran thing I think has been the last straw for some people, and has started to open up some of the fissures and cracks that were already breaking open between Trump and Congress, and John Thune, who's a insider establishment guy, Mike Johnson, who barely has control over his chamber, a lot of the commentators who have not always been on board with the second part of the Trump administration, all this sort of thing. Like, there's some cracks and fissures showing, and Marjorie Taylor is the loudest one right now. Now, bearing all that in mind, let's look at this cool propaganda video from Iran. Play the clip. So obviously this is Iranian state television video, and this is their more advanced missile that they're going to be sending out on its little launcher. This is all underground, by the way. They have these vast underground complexes to hide all of this stuff. And so, yep, there it goes, ready to fire. Bang, bang. And so, yeah, and there they line up more and all this type of thing. So it's the caption is disingenuous. Nuclear tensions spike as Iran launches advanced missiles amid escalating conflict. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. They don't even have enough material to make one. So this is another conventional missile. And also, if you want to launch a nuclear payload, that missile's too small. Don't ask me how I know that. But I thought it was an interesting sort of just a bit of propaganda. But if you want to see what the other side is promoting, it's their missiles, all this type of thing. Which gets into the second story, which is a story from Occupy Democrats from NPR talking about the evacuations from military bases. We're not going to read the whole thing because it's rather long. But the NPR, it says here, NPR reports that over 1,500 sailors, their families, and pets have been evacuated from Bahrain after the Trump administration launched a war against Iran without doing the slightest bit of preparation for any possible consequences, like missiles being fired at U.S. bases. Quote, they had to leave in a hurry, many taking only a backpack with clothes. They literally told them, get what you can in the backpack, you've got to go, said Jarek Johnson, commander of the American Legion Post 327 in Norfolk, Virginia. They came with no uniforms, nothing. The three we met first, they came with the clothes on their back they could fit in that backpack. It says here the base was asking for donations of toiletries and different things for the sailors coming back because they were coming back with nothing. The Navy Marine Corps Relief Society has handed out $1 million to roughly 2,000 sailors and their families since the evacuations began. And the group's chief operations officer, Don Cutler, a retired rear admiral, said, quote, I saw one gal, she had a 2-week-old and a 2-year-old and a dog in a crate and a suitcase. So she was just at that moment, looking to get out of danger, to get to someplace safe. And now we're at the point where families are back and they're starting to ask the question, well, what's next? Will we go back? NPR reports that the money raised is mainly to pay for essentials and to provide bridge loans to families so they can pay basic living expenses while they wait for the government to reimburse them, which can take months. And of course, people are blaming the Trump administration. I think it is interesting that, one, we can't seem to retreat from somewhere in good order. But I think it's also a little bit of a tragedy that unfortunately this is being done on an emergency basis, and this is the situation in which these people find themselves. Oh, that was an AI story. Well, that's not an important story. That we're not focused on transporting people back, safely, quickly, all this type of thing, and with all of their stuff. The problem is, a lot of the bases in the Middle East, thanks to Iranian drones, are uninhabitable. There's people running the Iran war from Europe at this point. Everyone's everywhere. We're talking about 40,000 people across 13 bases. It's tens of thousands of people. This is obviously a very small contingent of families that are affected by this, but I kind of asked the Pentagon that they didn't plan for this, and now people had to run out with a dog in a crate and a suitcase. Not that this is a legislation on the war effort sort of thing, but it would be nice if more could be done. However, big shout out to the American Legion and for the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society for stepping in and making this happen, and helping out these families in this great time of need in the midst of what has become a war zone. So big thank God for that, and thank God for them that they were able to figure that out. It's certainly going to be difficult to figure out housing, and people probably left cars behind, furniture. I mean, because people moved there for years. They broke. Imagine everything in your house. You lived there for years, and a lot of that stuff may not even exist anymore because it's been bombed. That's kind of the sad part. So, I thought it was kind of important to mention, and also, like I said, to shout out the people that are helping, like the NMCRS and the American Legion Post in Norfolk, Virginia. So, moving right along, let's stop at some Epstein news. And that, let me change my graphic real fast. Let's go over to Epstein and Michael Wolff. So, for those that don't know, Michael Wolff is a writer, and he had several interactions with Epstein and wrote a book that I think is very interesting. And I kind of want to read it. And according to this thing on the Daily Beast, why Trump feared a humiliating death on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. It says here, Donald Trump was terrified he was going to die in a plane crash when he got some more bad news. The aircraft once belonged to notorious child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Along with many other high-profile figures, including Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton, Trump had sought to distance himself from the disgraced financier. But in a new book by best-selling author Michael Wolff, reveals that Trump discovered a chartered plane he was using to fly to a campaign stop in Colorado in August 2024 was once owned by Epstein, while being thrown about the skies in one of the worst flights anyone on board had ever experienced. The Daily Beast has obtained a copy of the book ahead of its release on February 25th. Quote, I'm going to die on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, Trump howled, according to Wolff. In his book, All or Nothing, How Trump Recaptured America, Wolff writes that Trump's own plane was having mechanical problems, and the campaign team with Trump on board was flying to Aspen after a fundraiser in Jacksonville, Wyoming, on a hastily chartered Gulfstream. The flight was a nightmare. Wolff described it as a white-knuckle, head-banging, lurches, stomach-dropping turbulence ride with some stone-falling drops in altitude and air pressure. People were actually praying, he adds, and in the middle of it all, a report tracking the Trump team's peregrinations identified that they were riding in the former plane of Trump's old friend, the infamous sex abuser Jeffrey Epstein, writes Wolff. Epstein was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges in 2019 when he was found in his jail cell, blah, 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 blah. It says the author of Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House writes that Trump's golf buddy, Steve Witkoff, who's now acting as the president's go-between with Vladimir Putin and led last week's peace talks with the Russian delegation in Saudi Arabia, sent his plane to take him back to Palm Beach. A grateful Trump gave the flight crew $50 bills, assigned one for each one to keep the another to spend. Problems with his private plane were a major irritant to Trump, writes Wolff. His aircraft, nicknamed Trump Force One, was out of operation with a cracked windscreen weeks before the Iowa caucus. But the reality was that Trump did not want to engage with the fact that his Boeing 757, which he bought fourth hand in 2011 and then decked out with in gold, was aging. It had spent years effectively mothballed in an upstate New York airport during and after Trump's first term. When the aircraft was again put out of action during the campaign after a mechanic accidentally deployed the inflatable chute, the man was fired on the spot. After the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania in July, Wolff writes, Trump Force One became the decoy plane, quipping that his staff and guests availably shot out of the sky with Trump himself on a secret flight. The White House has been contacted for comment. Wolff's book has already sparked ire in Trump's circle. In a statement issued last November, the senior staff of the 2024 campaign, including co-chair Susie Wiles and other president's chief of staff, and Chris Lasivita said, a number of us have received injuries from this disgraced author, Michael Wolff, whose previous work can only be described as fiction. He is a known peddler of fake news who routinely concocts situations, conversations, and conclusions that never happen. As a group, we have decided not to respond to his bad faith inquiries, and we encourage others to completely disregard whatever nonsense he eventually publishes. Consider this our blanket response to whatever he writes. The book includes extensive passages on both Wiles and Lasivita. Trump's long ties to Epstein were also the subject of a bombshell released by Wolff just before the election when he shared a tape of the pervert talking about, quote, being the best friend to Trump with the Daily Beast. Those tapes revealed a claim by Epstein that his fleet of planes had a happier memory for Trump. Epstein alleged to Wolff that Trump and his now wife Melania first had sex on board his Boeing 727, later known as the Lolita Express, for its use to feed the financier's sick appetites. White House Communications Director Stephen Chung responded to a request for comment from the Daily Beast on Thursday, saying, evening with a statement on Friday, he said, Michael Wolff is a lying sack of shit and has been proven to be a fraud. He routinely fabricates stories originating from his sick and warped imagination, only possible because he has severe and debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome and has rotted his peanut-sized brain. Ah, what wonderful civil discourse we do have right now. But this story is mostly paywalled. And I'm not going to upgrade to paid for this, but if you're interested, and I have read some of this stuff about his time in tech and how he got into this whole world. His Substack, michaelwolffnyc.substack.com, is called Howl. And there's the first installment of stuff. You can read through it if you want to. I think some of the insider stuff is quite interesting. Someone sent me this as a gift article, but I read it already once, and so we can't go through it again. But if you want to and you're interested, you should. I brought up the Daily Beast article because it's linked in here, and I thought it would be interesting to go over the latest Epstein rumors, because that is now our new national hobby, is going over crazy Epstein rumors. So, I want to get into the midterms now, because not that we can know anything about how the midterms are going to go, but it's April, we're getting into campaign season, and I always track narratives. This is the Cameron Journal, the world is hard, this is not, and we do narratives here. And so, I think it's important now to start looking at the narratives that are going to affect us over the next 6 months, 7 months, going into the election in the fall. And this has to do, is a Fox News graphic with cash from a wealthy person named Neville Roy Singham moving through organizations throughout this country. And so it shows here that from him and these shell companies go to these companies that then go to these 58 other companies. No one that we know, unfortunately, except for Goldman Sachs, Independent Media Institute, who I know, Center for Pan-African Media, and African Public Media, Alliance for Global Justice, and then threading into these other organizations and areas. And the narrative here is interesting, and I'll read you the most important part. If you are a sane, well, let me start from the beginning. Ever since the great Precambrian woke explosion of 2020, it has no longer mattered what specific issue was, whether it was climate change, BLM, trans rights, Antifa, Free Palestine, or feminism. All left-wing activist causes suddenly felt deeply interconnected and totalizing in very weird and strange ways. If you're a sane person, you'd have asked, how come feminists didn't care about the Iranian women subjugated and slaughtered by the Muslims for wanting more freedom? The mullahs for wanting more freedom. How come UN women cared more about making sure trans men have access to female prisons than Hamas terrorists raping Israeli women? How come Greta How Dare You Thunberg smoothly pivoted to campaigning against Israeli apartheid while never once mentioning China destroying marine ecosystems with overfishing? What is even Queers for Palestine? Why the hell was Microsoft doing landing acknowledgements before Zoom town halls? Everything from American corporate life to Hollywood movies to universities became vehicles for the Omni Cause, a single, all-encompassing moral framework where climate, race, gender, borders, and foreign conflicts are fused. The surface issue often became secondary to maintaining ideological purity across the entire bundle. True. That's actually even still a problem in the left. Nothing so far. So, Melissa Chen rather, says here, I knew where it was coming from. Now Data Republican and Nazrin Amani have the receipts. David Horowitz used to say that the issue is never the issue is always the revolution. The revolution here is the overthrow of the ideological architecture of the West and the remaking of the world order. China's leadership explicitly wants to undermine American confidence of itself and of the US-led world order because Beijing is a revisionist power that sees the system as designed to keep it subordinate. China's not wrong. And so it amplifies narratives that portray the US-led order as the root of evil, imperialist, morally bankrupt, white supremacist, exploitative, and inevitable decline. The aim is cognitive warfare to erode domestic support for protecting this order, which serves to facilitate China's seamless rise. Neville Roy Singham has funneled at least $287 million through dark money intermediaries, donor-advised funds, shell companies, and U.S. nonprofits into a vast network of far-left activist groups, media outlets, and political education organizations to push this. Somehow I'm a liberal person. I never get any of this money. Don't hang out with the right people. Quote, Data Republican directly quotes Singham at the 2024 CCP forum in Shanghai. Quote, if we want to have a new world order based on multilateralism that President Xi and CPC in China had proposed, we have to undo the ideological damage that's been done by the narrative of World War II. Read that again. Understand that Singham sees the World War II narrative as the last major cultural obstacle standing between the current order and the multipolar China-led future his network is working towards. And now, notice all those around us who are parroting the same line. It used to just be crazy lefties in the NGOs like the UN, or the globalists like the WEF. The UN's not an NGO, but continue. Now you're seeing it on the right. Beijing wins when a majority in the West treats US hegemony and the post-1945 system as invalid so that it can replace it with one where it sets the rules and norms. And this is the open thread of the House of Singham, Neville Singham's mega exposure. And this is from Fox News, and like I said, there's the graphic here. This narrative, particularly the end of we have to end the World War II order and it's happening on both the left and the right and all this sort of thing, that's a very important narrative because as we approach the multipolar world in which we are now entering, the old order is on its way out. But here's the problem. We're going to hear a lot about this narrative. But here's the problem we have already. Trump has been the biggest advocate of ending the current world order. It's expensive. You know, he's threatening NATO every other week because they cost too much money. He is spending a lot of time and effort pulling the U.S. back from its various overseas commitments, especially on the money front. The new budget chops out, $500 million in, all sorts of, healthcare and food, all this sort of thing, social work and all this sort of thing around the world, in order to enhance the defense budget to $1.5 trillion. It's the first time the right's talking about it that way, but that's kind of been the party line for a while. There's nobody really invested in the continuation of globalization. Honestly, China was the biggest winner out of globalization to begin with. You'd think it would be in their interest to do so, but no, because they understand power. They're the participants and have benefited from a system they do not own or control. They don't want to own it. That's too expensive. They've seen what's happened in the US, and the Chinese are many things, but they're not stupid. They don't want to own it, they want to control it. And those two are very different things. You can let someone else own something, but if you control it, that's almost better than owning it because you get all the benefit, none of the cost. That's what China's trying to do. However, the problem with saying that this is just an entirely China-led thing and it's Neville Singham who's trying to undermine it, that's also in policy and practice what we're doing anyway. Now, I'm not saying that this is the great thing or that this isn't dark money or that this isn't, that these organizations aren't getting funding from China. There's major corporations whose entire market is China. There's a lot of money flowing out of China into the rest of the world. And yes, Beijing certainly wins when the 1945 system, falls apart, which I would argue we're already pretty much there. Globalization is on its way out. And the conflict in Iran, the pandemic showed us the problems with globalization and showed us the cracks. I would say the war in Iran is doing a good job of killing it because everyone's going to want more local supply chains, things that they control, working closer with local allies, not sending stuff over oceans for hundreds of miles. This and all of this is happening, but all of this is happening regardless of what Neville Singham thinks about. So this is interesting because this is probably going to be a narrative. I'll put it down now, especially given that Fox News is doing it. This is going to be a narrative that and notice how this post starts. It starts with, oh, the left and all their issues and the Omni cause and all this type of thing. And why is this all combined together? Because it's secretly being funded by Neville Singham to promote China. That is the simple narrative. And I guarantee you we're going to see this fall where the new attack against leftists, liberals, Democrats, any blue aligned thing is going to be, well, they're getting paid by China to say that. Or this is more, China influence, China money influencing them to do this. I guarantee you the goal is going to be associating Democrat liberal leftism with China, who's an enemy, to invalidate the Democratic talking points. And so I've bored you with this post to say, I actually want to follow this woman too. Bored you with this post to say, look out for this narrative. Look out for this. Liberals are being paid by China to do this, and if they weren't being paid by China, they wouldn't do this. Because it serves two purposes. One, it associates Democrats with China, who's an enemy, which continues the narrative that Democrats are not fellow citizens with policy disagreements, but an enemy. That's important number one. Important number two narrative is that it also says that all of the policy recommendations and everything liberal and leftist people are advocating for doesn't exist and no one wants it but for the fact that it's funded by China. It invalidates the actual problems wrong going on in our society, which even a lot of Republican rank and file voters are starting to acknowledge. So look out for this narrative because this is going to, I guarantee you, as the sun sets in the west, this is going to come out in the midterms. They're already being talked about by someone who works at Fox News, dated Republican, and this gal, Melissa Chen. I guarantee, and she writes for the Spectator too. I guarantee you this is a narrative. I guarantee you it's a narrative coming into the midterms, which makes this next post very interesting. This is a interesting list of why things are probably not going to go well for Republicans in the midterms this fall. Minus the fact Democrats are killing it in special elections throughout the country. And there have been a lot because Republicans got appointed to cabinet and all this sort of things. There's been a lot of turnover. And so with that in mind, we have this list of you're going to lose for the following reasons. Now, this person is no one other than a rank and file Democrat, but the list is good. So I'll critique when necessary. Trump promised to help blue-collar workers and instead has fucked them while helping his wealthy buddies. Not so true, but the tariffs don't help. 2, he's openly corrupt and everyone can see it. True. He talked about meritocracy but elevated and appointed unqualified morons. One would argue it depends on what merit you're looking for. Meritocracy can be ability, it also can be the ability to get people to like you. 4, he's gone too far in his border security, has pissed off Latino voters and a lot of white voters that only wanted the criminals removed. That's probably somewhat true. I think things with the deportations have gone a lot farther than a lot of people planned. I don't think it's a panacea, but yeah, I think the immigration stuff is going to be tough to message on. All of his promises about lowering prices on gas, electricity, insurance, groceries have been broken. That is somewhat true depending on where you live. Gas is obviously going up because of Iran. Electricity is out of control, but that has to do with AI. Insurance is bad if you're in Florida. Grocery prices still remain fairly elevated, although they are down from 2023 and 2024, and that's important to mention. Started a war with Iran. I don't care that he calls it an excursion, it's a war. The Epstein files, no explanation needed on that. Has dedicated his efforts to foreign affairs, even though he campaigned primarily on domestic issues. I'll give him a pass on that one. He has alienated and angered our allies for no reason whatsoever. True. His tariffs have driven up prices and created an effective tax on average Americans. Also true. He's massively increased our debt and deficit, even though he promised to reduce it. True. He's failed to create jobs and opportunities for young people and blue-collar workers. He has negative job growth record in his first year. That one is... So they revised the labor stats for last year, and the job growth was basically flat. We created a handful of jobs last year. Now, I will say, to their credit, last month's job numbers for March were quite good. 175,000. But, I mean, yes, the economy has certainly struggled. But here's the thing, and I'll even give Trump a little bit of pass on that. For longtime listeners, in the fall of 2024, when we were about to have the election, I said at the time, whoever wins in November, and it does not matter, is going to have big economic headwinds heading into next year, 25 and beyond. There's pretty much no way Trump was going to have a great economy even 1 year in. It just wasn't going to happen. There's too many economic headwinds. The economy's changing too much. Money's too expensive. There's a lot that really a president can't control. Also, we tend to ascribe the economy to the president, and we really shouldn't, because his levers over the economy are comparatively few, but we continue to do that. The tariffs certainly did not help the existing economic headwinds involved. And the last one, and I think this one's quite interesting, is it's obvious that many of the MAGA influencers don't give a shit about anything other than making as much money as they can. Instead of helping steer a policy, they just reinforce Trump's worst instincts. I think that last one is true for some of the MAGA influencers. I think some people are starting to split off, which I find is very interesting. But I think how you view Trump's worst instincts is incredibly subjective. I think a lot of people, quite frankly, like and are okay with what is going on. For most people, except when you go to the grocery store or this type of thing, the life today is not that much measurably worse than our lives were a year and a half ago. Are things expensive? Yes. Well, they were before. If anything, that's gotten a little bit easier, but not much. Is the world complicated and scary and frightening? Yeah, the same. Like, I think for the average person, a lot of the effects of what has happened hasn't really reached people where they live. The USAID money getting cut didn't affect them in any meaningful way. Department of Education getting cut hasn't really hit that much yet because a lot of it's tied up in court. A lot of the stuff that Trump wanted to do has gotten struck down and tied up in court, so it hasn't really hit the regular average person yet. I think that will start to change, especially as the year drags on. But that, I mean, I think the MAGA influencers, I think a lot of them are quite fine with what's happening, and what is going on is what they voted for. But I think it's also important to understand from a narrative perspective that this is probably going to be social media and a lot of Democrats talking about these points into the fall. And I think the problem with this is none of this is emotionally charged. It's very dry. It's very like everybody thinks this way when that's almost never true. I think it doesn't really reach people where they are. But I think this is an excellent foil for what the Democrat narrative and messaging is going to be going into the midterms. It's going to be kind of like, hey, if you look outside and don't like what's happening, vote for us. Which is unfortunate because it's a great opportunity to articulate a point of view. And I wish they would articulate a point of view. Unfortunately, I think this is the best we're going to get. I don't know if any of this is going to really move voters. I really don't. Anyway, we're getting to the top of the hour and my throat is tired. How I love this article from Semafor, speaking of the midterms. And this kind of reinforces my point on what's going to reach voters where. They felt overwhelmed by bad news and grocery bills. They weren't sure who you can trust these days, and they couldn't name a politician that might fix it. By convening a focus group of 7 swing state voters, all mothers between 27 and 48 years old, the Democratic firm Navigator Research found angst about the country's direction and little faith in either party's ability to fix its problems. Quote, "It's just very overwhelming to me trying to figure out what direction we're actually going in," said a 40-year-old mother of 3 from Georgia, who'd voted for neither President Trump nor Kamala Harris in 2024. "I feel like things are going to get worse before they get better," said a 38-year-old mother in Wisconsin who supported Trump. "It's going to take a lot to break down those evil walls that were built up and all the evil behind everything so that things can get better eventually." Navigator Research regularly gathers groups of representative Americans to check in with voters who aren't overly engaged with politics. Last week's session, which was viewed by Semafor, focused on women who felt it had become too expensive to comfortably support a family in the U.S. Quote, "The gas prices are going up right when taxes hit," said a 27-year-old mother from Arizona. But the voters surveyed didn't seem to see either party as the solution. Even those who'd voted for Harris couldn't name a Democrat who spoke to their needs. Quote, "They don't see any improvement in what's happening in the economy," said Margie O'Mara, principal at GBAO Strategies, who proctored the focus group. "They don't see anything from the Trump administration that's helping them. These are folks who are looking for it, and they're not feeling it. They're feeling that things are getting worse." Quote, "I'm not a fan of politicians," said a 34-year-old mother from Michigan, who said she was only aware of some national Democrats because social media has really blown them up, unquote. The participants indicated they largely turned to social media rather than traditional media for news about the country. The news wasn't good. The women were vaguely aware of Attorney General Pam Bondi, but some thought she had resigned her office in a scandal. They were more closely following the Department of Health and Human Services under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and concerned about unsafe products being peddled by the government. "Our country allows all these dyes and chemicals in the stuff that they sell us and feed us that a lot of countries don't allow," said a 37-year-old mother from Michigan, the Wisconsin mother worried about population control. Asked what news sources she relied on, the Michigan mother said traditional news had, quote, "turned into the shows my grandma used to watch," unquote, soap operas with forced narratives. 2 women who had voted for Harris said they got news and analysis from right-wing personality Candace Owens. One of them even said that she liked to see Owens, who's known for spreading conspiracy theories, run for president. Quote, "She does fact check," she explained. "She has a lot of resources." And this point is very interesting. The voters most keen to talk with political reporters are typically extremely engaged in politics. Most people will never attend a political rally in person, and most hang up when pollsters call. So it was useful and instructive to spend an evening listening to women who did vote, had some worries about the country's direction, but avoided most news. It underscored the challenge that Democrats and Republicans alike face reaching these voters. How do you convince voters who pay only fleeting attention to the news and who are uncertain and pessimistic about the future that your new legislation is responsible for something good? I have no clue. This article gets into a problem I originally explained to someone kind of recently, that no one understands how to message politics in this era because it's so diluted. I mean, take this show for example. I produce 4 videos a week. My long form content will get several dozen views. My shorts do hundreds and thousands. Here's the problem. The 2-minute version of this is not nearly as complete as the full hour version of this show, or even the time I've spent on this story. It'll get chopped smaller. And so imagine that across the ecosystem. So if you're the average person and you're just doom scrolling on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you might get a Candace Owens video, a Tucker Carlson video, a Cameron Cowan video, a David Pakman video, Kyle Kulinski, and most social media is a lot more narrow than that. So if social media thinks you really want conservative stuff, you're only going to get primarily conservative people. If you're liberal, you're only going to get liberal people. And for me, it's kind of a catch-22 sort of thing. So it's a very difficult thing to get a coherent message to people. It's not TV advertising. You really have to say the same thing over and over and over again and get some people talking about it so that eventually 20 seconds of that message may get in someone's short video feed. That's incredibly hard to do. But when you have people, who are producing 5 videos a week, like your Asmongold, I do 4 videos a week. I'm not 5 videos a week. Your Asmongold's, people like that. That then sets the narrative. If you want to know why Theo Vaughn and Asmongold and Rogan always have these higher, because they produce so much content, and that content gets reshared and re-uploaded by other channels just trying to get on the juice, that becomes narrative because that's what's filling the algorithm. My best months, social media wise, are when I produce an outsized amount of videos. So if I do an extra event, or we have news hours and we'll have interviews or this type of thing, when I produce the content at volume, that's when I usually get more views. So when you have people that can do that, they're the ones that have the influence. And remember, all of this, and I mean all of this, is dependent on 4 tech companies who basically control what people see. It's incredibly hard for anyone to reach much of anything because people's minds are going to be made up by the people they actually trust. Now, obviously, some people trust me. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Thank you. Some people trust me. Some people trust Candace Owens. Same thing for Kyle Quincy, David Pakman, Hassan Parker. I could go on. Even Asmongold, and he's a dick. But people trust him. And so on it goes. Messaging through that noise, I think, is going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I think for Democrats that are afraid of taking on new media, learn to do podcasts. A lot of them. That's where the conversation in politics is happening. Even for engaged voters like these women on Semafor. So, my back hurts and my throat hurts more. So I'm going to save the Robert Reich story about the wealthy pouring so much of their money wealth into politics for next week and the Supreme Court on mail-in voting. I'm also going to save for next week, and we'll go from there, because I'm ready to be done. It's been a little bit of a crazy day around here. So, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. You can find me online at Cameron Cowan on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, at Cameron Journal on TikTok and Blue Sky. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter, and if you want to support this journalism and my voice of reason and non-outrage neutrality, please subscribe to Cameron Journal Plus. I also want to remind everyone I am launching a new live event called Cameron Journal Salons, where I'm going to bring together the best of the guests from the Cameron Journal in one panel discussion in some evenings starting this month and into May and June, getting ready for a big virtual summit that I'm working on with Suit Media. So keep an eye out in Substack, emails, all that type of thing for that. I will 110% be sending a lot of emails about that. So you're going to want to get on the train now. Cameron Journal Salons are going to be really cool because if you're a Cameron Journal Plus subscriber, they are free for you. If you're not, there's going to be a small charge. Bearing in mind, these are not going to be big broadcasts like this. These are going to be private events on Zoom with Q&A time with some of my really high-flying guests. I'm going to try to get everybody in. Stan Lai from China. Which may be complicated due to time zones. I'm going to get everybody in. And there's going to be replay afterwards, all this sort of thing. It's not going to be in for the public. It is for private, either ticket holders or Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. And Substack subscribers. So, if you haven't subscribed, now would be the time as we get ready to launch Cameron Journal Salons, where we have great conversations with interesting people. Mostly because that's what I love to do, and that's what I love doing about this job. So, that's it. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great night. Bye-bye now.